بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما رب العالمين. اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. أما بعد. So this lecture, inshallah, will be the final lecture in the series of the disease and the cure. And we finished the book last week, and I intended this lecture to be a conclusion. Just like we had an introduction, I wanted also to have a conclusion. And in this conclusion, I wanted really to summarize what ibnalqayyim rahimahullah talked about. Kind of provide you all with the themes, the big themes in the book, the skeleton of what the book is about, to have an idea of how he progressed, rahimahullah, from one point to the other and how they relate to each other. Because it is hard, I think, when we meet 1 week after the other and we say, this week we're going to be talking about this, next week we meet and then we'll be talking about that. It's hard to see the big picture of what he wrote, what he intended to convey, and how all these parts work together towards the answer that he was giving. Because you could look at the book of Ad-Da' wa Dawa as one big fatwa, one big answer. You had a question, and the answer is like a fatwa. How do I get out of this problem? And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah started talking about all the ways and all the elements that are needed in order for you to escape that problem, that shahwa, that addictive sin. So it's important, as we studied each of those sections, each of those lectures, to also step back a little bit and look at the entire structure so that you see what he was trying to do, and then you understand the book, and you will understand it better when you understand the entire structure. So if someone were to ask you, beyond the individual lectures that you have attended or you listened to, what is Ad-Da' wa Dawa about? Summarize that for me in 1 minute. Summarize it for me in 2 minutes or in 5 minutes. What would you say? What did he talk about? What are the elements of his answer? How do they connect to each other? What are the lessons that you have learned from them? And once you understand that, you'll understand the book better. And you could go both ways. You could understand a summary of the book and then go into reading the book, or you could read the book and then summarize the book. Either way, the summary allows you to capture the essence of that book, and then once you have the essence, the main points, then you go into the secondary points. Go into the other arguments, but you always can come back to the elements, the main elements, the primary objective of the author, and through that you can understand the book better. So what I will try to do bi'idhnillah azza wa jal is kind of two things today. First, I will go through what I consider to be the main points in the book, and I want you to see how they are related to each other. I will not explain them. I'll just go through them. And once we finish that bi'idhnillah, I'll return to the book and try to go through some of them, maybe with a little bit more explanation. But we'll see, if time allows, whatever it allows, we will do, inshallah. But at least we've stated the main themes of the book. And if you've attended, if you've listened, you'll remember some of them. And that will allow you, inshallah, to retrieve what you have heard before. Right? So, we begin, bi'idhnillah. So he's asked a question about how to escape that sin. Ibn al-Qayyim starts his answer by saying that whenever illness there is, Allah has a cure for it. Allah has sent down a cure to that illness, whether that illness is physical or spiritual. You see the connection between the two? Because he's asking him for what? A cure. He says any illness, physical or spiritual, Allah has a cure for it. And the Quran is a cure for all illnesses. It's a cure for the illnesses of the body and the illnesses of the heart, whether that is shahwa, desire and temptation, or shahwa, confusion about religion. He says the Quran answers both. And he brought the story, well, actually that's for later. I don't want to explain it. I just want to state. Then he also says dua also is a beneficial medicine, of the most beneficial medicines. But, he says, the Quran and dua in their impact depend on the person who is reciting them. I mean, in themselves, they're what? Medicine. But they depend on who's reciting them. And the person who's receiving them, is he willing to receive them? And are there any obstacles to prevent the impact of the Quran and dua? Then he talked about dua, how it deals or comes to deal with affliction, with bala. Then he mentioned the benefit of ilhah, to insist in your dua and not to give up. And that giving up and being hasty, isti'jal, is an obstacle that prevents the dua from being accepted. And then he mentioned some of the manners that help the dua be accepted. Adabud dua, the manners of dua. And then he said that dua is like a weapon, depends on the person who's holding it, the person who is saying it. And some dua gets accepted not because of the phrase of the dua itself or the words of the dua itself, but because the person who is saying it has experienced necessity, or is sincere, or has done something pleasing to Allah that makes that dua acceptable. Then he distinguishes, and this is connected to dua, he distinguishes between husnul dhan and ghurur. Husnul dhan, thinking the best about Allah Azza wa Jal, and ghurur being a delusion. He says husnul dhan is the same thing as raja, hope. And it is what compels you to do good things, meaning you think the best of Allah Azza wa Jal, but you do righteousness. He says this is what is praised. This is husnul dhan. But if you say, I think the best about Allah, but you continue to commit sins, he says this is a delusion. Right? This would be a delusion. And he says, وَتَتَابُعُ النِّعَمِ. He says, if you see that ni'am you're being blessed, they're following each other, but you are sinful and disobedient to Allah Azza wa Jalla, he says, do not consider this to be a good sign. That is istidraj. You're being led to your own destruction. تَتَابُعُ النِّعَمِ مَعَ الْمَعَاصِ istidraj. And he said, by the way, sins are harmful. They are like poison. And they must have an impact sooner or later. It doesn't mean that if you don't see them now, it's not going to happen later. And there is no evil that you see except that there is a sin behind it, causing that evil. Then he talked about all the consequences and the punishment of sins. And that is the longest part of the book. And we may go through them. Then he said also, unlike the sinners, those who are pious experience sweet living, because sweet living is reserved for them. And that is the best thing that you can experience in this life. And life actually is incomplete until your heart is sound. Salamatul qalb. And the heart is only sound when it is free from shirk and bid'ah, shahwa, temptation, shubha, religious confusion or doubt, and ghafla, distance from Allah Azza wa Jal. Is this too dense, or are you still with me? Oh, khair inshaAllah. Salamatul qalb. La tatimmu salamatul qalb. You do not have soundness of the heart unless you are safe from shirk, and then bid'ah, and then shahwa, and then shubha, and then ghafla. Okay? So all these things, by the way, we talked about them before. That's why I'm not going to explain them. I just want you to remember them, or be reminded of them, or be intrigued by what you hear, and to go back either to the lecture or to the book. Right? Then he said, we talked about sin. Then he said, let's talk about the kinds of sin. So he says sins are minor and major. And the greatest of the great sins is what? Shirk. So not all sins are alike, major, minor, and of the major, the greatest, the worst of them is shirk. And he says shirk is of two types. One that has to do with Allah Azza wa Jal, and one that has to do with your worship of Allah. So he says the one that has to do with Allah Azza wa Jal can also be divided into two. One is called shirk al-ta'til, the shirk of negation, where you deny the existence of Allah Azza wa Jal, or deny His attributes, deny his names, you negate something about him. So he becomes either non-existent or less. Or the other kind of that type of shirk that has to do with Allah Azza wa Jal is to have another God with Allah Azza wa Jal. So Allah creates and that God creates. Right? Allah saves and that God saves. So that also is a type of shirk. That second type of shirk that has to do with your worship of Allah Azza wa Jal is when you worship Allah but you are insincere. And that shirk is major and minor. And it could be in intentions, in what you say, and in what you do. Then he says the reality or the essence of shirk is what? Is to liken the created to the creator. تشبيه المخلوق بالخالق. He says, what is the essence of shirk? He says that the created is dealt with or thought of as the creator himself. He says that is the essence of shirk. What is uluhiyya? Uluhiyya is for Allah Azza wa Jal is to be unique in His perfections and unique in how you relate to Him. Right? That Allah Azza wa Jal is unique, meaning there's no one like Him in any way. And how you worship Him and you relate to Him is unique. You don't worship Allah and worship somebody else like Allah. Right? He says that is the essence of tawheed. And the opposite is the essence of shirk. And it says then after shirk, he says, then of the greatest sins is to think the worst of Allah, to expect the worst from Allah. He says that is a grave sin. Then after that is to speak without knowledge about Allah Azza wa Jal, and then killing, and then zina, fornication. Then he said that the doors of sins from which they enter are four. The gaze, the look, and then the thought, and then speech, and then movement. He says these are the doors of sin. And of course, why does he mention the doors of sin? Because if you know the door, you can lock it, you could block it. So sin does not enter. Then he talked about zina and talked about sodomy and the consequences and the punishment and the evil effects of zina and sodomy. Then he says, how do you treat these diseases? Right? And he says first, you prevent them from happening in the first place. Or if they happen, you uproot them. And he says the first way that you could prevent a sin, because he says two ways that you stop it, right? Stop it before it happens, or what? If it happens, you take it out. So he says, okay, if you're going to stop it before it happens, how do you do this? He says the first is protecting your eyes, protecting your gaze. And then he mentioned the benefits of protecting your gaze, what it does to you and what it gives you. The second thing that helps you protect yourself from sin even happening is what? For the heart to be preoccupied with the opposite. There's no space for that sin. Preoccupied with the love of Allah Azza wa Jal and the fear of Allah, so that you're not free for that sin to come into your heart. Then he talked about ishq, and that is one of the main sections or parts of the book. He talks about ishq and he says it's impossible for a person to love Allah Azza wa Jal and simultaneously have ishq of beautiful images, because ishq is that excessive love, excessive, obsessive love that dominates the heart. He says it's impossible for the person to have that and to have what? Love of Allah Azza wa Jal. They cannot combine in one heart. And he said Allah Azza wa Jal created people for His worship. And that worship is to have complete love with complete humility. That's the definition of worship. Allah created people to worship Him. What is this worship? That they would love Allah Azza wa Jal the most. That is this perfect love, and submit to Him more than they submit to anybody else. He says this is worship. Right? And the basis of shirk is shirk in mahabba. The essence of shirk is to have shirk in love. So if you love someone like you love Allah, or with the love of Allah Azza wa Jal, that would be considered shirk. He says that is the essence of shirk. So you cannot really be a true worshipper of Allah Azza wa Jal while you associate others in that love with Allah. That's why ishq cannot be what? Allowed in Islam. Yet it competes with the tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal. He said then the types of love are four. Loving Allah Azza wa Jal, and this is insufficient to save you. And then loving what Allah loves, and that is necessary. And that is the thing that saves you. And then a consequence of those two is loving for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And there's a fourth kind, which is the opposite of Allah's love, is to love with Allah. You with me? So loving Allah, and then what? Loving what Allah loves. He says you need the second to be saved. You can't just say, I love Allah and that is enough. You need to love Allah and to love what Allah loves. Meaning do what Allah wants you to do. The third is love for the sake of Allah. And by the way, if you forgot what these things mean, if we have time, ask me, inshallah. I can briefly explain it. And then the fourth one is an opposite to the love of Allah, shirk love, which is to love with Allah Azza wa Jal. And he says, the beloved, what you love can be divided into two. A thing that you love for itself and a thing that you love for another. And the only one that deserves to be loved for himself is whom? Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? The only one that deserves to be loved for himself is Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he also said, and I know that this is dense, right? I know I should have reminded you to buy some coffee or tea before you came here, right? Or if somebody is listening to this online, go get yourself some coffee, tea, caffeine. Or if you're listening to this later, not live, you pause, go make yourself some tea, and then come back and listen to this. You probably will be able to digest it a lot better, right? So he says, what you love, yes. There are things that you love that lead to things that you love. Right? There are things that you love that leads to things that you hate. There are things that you hate that leads to things that you love. Things that you hate that lead to things that you hate. He says what you love and leads to what you love, that's easy. Everybody will do it. What you hate and leads to what you hate, that's easy. Everybody will avoid it. But what you hate and it leads to what you love, or what you love and hate leads to what you hate, he says those two is the test. These two are the test. And that's what you're tested with in this dunya. Things that you want to do, but they are bad for you. And things that you don't want to do, but they are good for you. This is how Allah Azza wa Jal tests you. And he said also, Al-mahabbatu aslu kulli amalin wa deen. He says love is the basis of any action and every religion, whether this religion is a true religion or a false religion. And he again emphasizes ishq is excessive love, and it corrupts the heart, and it's the opposite of tawheed. We're close to the end now. And he says, okay, what is the medicine for ishq, for that obsessive love? He says, first of all, that you know that it's dangerous and how dangerous it is. Second, that you perform external and internal acts of worship that will take you away from thinking about ishq, thinking about the one that you love and wanting to be with them and wanting to commit a sin. So internal acts of worship, external acts of worship that bring you closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. A third, that you continue to plead with Allah Azza wa Jal and ask Him to dismiss this illness and take it away from you and to bring your heart back to Allah Azza wa Jal. And the fourth is to resist it, especially in the beginning, so it does not take hold. Just like any illness, any disease. Fight it in the beginning, it's easier than fighting it later. And then the fifth, if you're unable to fight it in the beginning and it takes hold, you be chaste and you be patient and you conceal it until you meet Allah Azza wa Jal. Then he talked about the many harms of ishq. And then at the end of it, he said that Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who deserves to be loved more than anything else, for how perfect He is subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for the many blessings that He had given us. And that the servant of Allah has no comfort and no happiness until he loves Allah Azza wa Jal, and this is the greatest pleasure and joy in this world, and which leads to the greatest pleasure and joy in the hereafter, which is seeing Allah Azza wa Jal and being near Him. And every ladha, every joy in this world could be one that could take you, or a lot of joy in this world could be one that could take you to the hereafter, assist you in reaching Allah Azza wa Jal, and that is praiseworthy. Or it could take you away from Allah Azza wa Jal, and that is condemnable. Or it could be a type of ladha that does not take you away from Allah, but it decreases the potential of you being closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. So it is mubah, but it is distracting, right? And then finally he talks about loving women, or in general you can generalize it and say loving parts of this dunya, and you can say that they are not harmful, they are beneficial as long as they do not take you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is it. This is the entire summary of the entire book. So could you see what he talked about? Right? So now after we've talked about this book, this is the entire book. If you reduce it to these points, at least you could always go back to them and say, in ad-da' wa dawa, in the disease and the cure, he talked about A, B, C, D, and so on. Then when you go to the book, you locate these points. So they're mentioned, by the way, right? You could go back to a recording of this lecture, it's mentioned. So you can always go back and you say, this is the point, this is the main point, this is another point, main point, this is another third point. These are how they are related to each other. This is how he constructed his answer, rahimahullah. Now we can discuss now with a little bit of more detail some of these elements, right? And we're not going to have time to go through all of it. So when he began, rahimahullah, and he said that every illness has a cure, it's important to remember this. Every illness has a cure, physical or spiritual. So it doesn't matter what your problem is, there's a solution for it. عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ وَجَهِلَهُ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ. Whether we know it or not, there is a solution for it. And if you don't know, you ask. You ask people because they may know what you do not know, but you also ask whom? Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So when he says there is a medicine, then he talks about what the medicine that he talked about. He talked about the Quran, and he mentioned how he used Quran as a physical medication for himself, how he used Al-Fatiha when he was sick in Mecca and there was no doctor. There's no one there. And he would read Al-Fatiha with Zamzam, blow it on Zamzam, and he would drink it and he would get better. So he says Al-Fatiha is a great medication, great remedy if you know how to use it. Okay? But the Quran is a cure. So he's telling you Quran can cure that illness of yours. Dua also can cure that illness. And the dua is what? Is very effective. And the problem here is what? It's not the problem with dua, the problem is with the person who's asking. Right? Sometimes you ask and you are distracted. Sometimes you ask and you don't believe that this thing is going to come your way. So that's why he said, as-silah bidaribih. He says, a weapon depends on the holder of the weapon. You could have the best sword, but not know how to use it. You could have dua, but then not know how to use it. And then he talked, rahimahullah, he said, insist in the dua and don't be hasty and impatient. If you're hasty and you say, I've been asking, what's going to happen is you're going to stop asking. Then your dua is not going to be answered. But you need to keep insisting on and on and on, because that's one of the reasons for the dua to be accepted. And then he talked about some of the benefits or some of the adab of dua, the manners, the etiquette of dua. He says, so حضور القلب وجمعيته. He says that your heart may be present, all of it, when you are making that dua. Then you seek the best times of dua, and you face the qibla, you have tahara, you raise your hands, you begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, then salah and salam upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then before you proceed with your dua, you repent from sin, and then ask Allah Azza wa Jal for forgiveness, and then insist, really insist, you feel it, and plead with Allah Azza wa Jal, and keep asking Him out of hope and fear. And plead with Allah using His names and attributes and the tawheed, and you give a sadaqah as you are asking Allah Azza wa Jal. Then he says, فَهَذَا الدُّعَاءُ لَا يَكَادُ يُرَدُّ أَبَدًا. It's often never rejected. So if all of you is involved in that dua, he says it's seldom rejected, right? Now, and he says sometimes the dua gets accepted because of the condition of the person who is saying this dua, not the words that were said. And we've described how some people, when they hear that so-and-so made dua and he said A, B, C, and D, you think that the secret is in A, B, C, and D, not the fact that at that time he was really sincere. He was really in need. He did some good things. It's for that his dua was accepted, right? So he's just focus on that, in addition to the dua that was inherited and passed on from Rasulullah alayhi salatu wassalam. The difference between thinking the best about Allah Azza wa Jal and then delusion, that I hope is clear, so I don't need to emphasize that. Now, so the sins, he said, are like poison in the bodies. And some of the consequences or punishment for sins. And again, I'll just mention them because we talked about them before. He said you will be deprived of knowledge, deprived of provision, rizq, sustenance. He says there's a tightness and darkness that you will find in your heart, opposite the joy of worship. He says there's an alienation and distance that you will feel between you and people. Okay, you're not gonna get along with them. They're not gonna get along with you, and then the consequence of that sin will be translated into the character of everybody around you. As some of the Salaf have said, I indeed disobey Allah. I see this in the manner of how my animal and my wife deals with me. Like my sin gets translated into bad character of everything and everyone around me. I see it, right? So he says, you see that. He says also that his affairs become difficult for him. Whenever he goes somewhere, the door is closed. And he says also a darkness that he finds in his heart. He feels it like the darkness of the night. And he also said that also it weakens the heart and weakens the body. The heart lives on energy that Allah Azza wa Jal gives to him to do good things. And the body lives on the energy that the heart has. If the heart is weak, the body is weak. So he's saying here, the believer's strength is in his heart. So if you commit a sin, you weaken your heart. It doesn't have any resolve, any patience, any determination, any goals anymore. So you lose the strength of your heart, then you lose the strength of your body. Then you will be denied the opportunity to obey Allah Azza wa Jal, because you will miss that. You're not going to be facilitated, aided by Allah to obey Him. He said that it is going to shorten your life and remove barakah from it. So when you sin, it will take barakah away from your life and it will shorten your life. Whether it physically shortens it, so you live less, or when the barakah goes away, it'd be as if you've lived less. And also that sins lead to other sins and they generate other sins. When you commit one sin, it will call on another sin and it will lead you to another sin. It doesn't stop. And he says that you will continue then, if you continue to commit those sins, you will get so used to them until you will love them, and then you would want them, you would favor them, and then Allah will send the shayateen at you to push you towards more sin. You become a veteran of sin. Not just someone who dabbles into it, no, you become actually a veteran of sin. And he said also that it weakens, as we said, it weakens the heart, so it does not want to repent. Doesn't want to come to Allah Azza wa Jal. It just is happy with that sin and with the sinful around him. And also it transforms the heart completely until sin becomes something that he enjoys. The fitrah gets corrupted. You don't see bad things as bad anymore. You don't see good things as good anymore. Right? And then also part of the consequences and the punishment of sin, he says you will continue to commit that sin until you don't see it as sin anymore. And he repeats again that, the consequence of the sin, you will see it in everything that is around you. It will lead to humiliation. So anyone who is sinful feel humiliation in himself, and will see that humiliation given back to him from everybody that is around him. He said it corrupts the mind, it puts a seal on the heart, and it brings a person up, under the curse of the Prophet ﷺ. It also corrupts the land and spreads corruption in the land, decreases rain, decreases water, decreases rizq, brings on earthquakes and all sorts of disasters on earth and lack of barakah. It removes the haya, so a person is never shy anymore, and weakens the heart, removes the respect that people have for you. Allah Azza wa Jal will forget you and let you to your own, and if that happens, the shaitan will be your ally. Right? Naam, and also, see, I told you this is the longest part of the book. And he also said, rahimahullah, it will bring fear and alarm to the heart of the sinful. We said then when we talked about it, if you think about anxiety, if you think about depression, if you about anything mental, right? We say that a strong element of increasing that, if not creating it from the beginning, is sin, right? And he said again, he talks about that darkness in the heart and alienation from everybody else. It also will make that heart very sick. And if our heart is sick, just think about that it cannot find comfort in anything that is around it, and anything that it does, and anyone that is around it. It will make you a captive of the shaitan and a captive of your own sin and temptations. You will not be able to run away from them. Again, people will disrespect you, and again, you will lose all the praiseworthy, honorable titles in the Quran. You are no longer a believer or a muhsin or a ta'ib or all of these things. You are the opposite of all of these things. So you are low and small in yourself, and you're low and small with Allah Azza wa Jal. He says it decreases your intelligence, it decreases your ability to think. It takes you away from Allah Azza wa Jal. And again, he talked about barakah and rizq being denied, ilm being taken away from you, your actions and their barakah taken away from you. No. And it gives, and this is an important one, it gives your enemy power against you, no matter what that enemy is. So it gives shaitan power against you to harm you. Right? So think about you do have enemies, by the way, whether you are aware of it or not. So the shaitan is your enemy, and he's trying to harm you every time, whether physically or spiritually. He says when you sin, you empower him. And if you empower him, he can hurt you physically and spiritually. Right? And your physical enemies, not the shayateen, but from the ins, from people, you also empower them. When you sin, you remove Allah's protection. So what happens? They can harm you, right? And then it makes you sin also, makes you think about yourself and it's your own benefit. It'll remove the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal that you have and will stop new blessings from being received. So you will lose them. It will put a distance between you and the best of people around you. So it will put a distance between you and the angels. And a distance between you and the righteous, because this is not your company. The sinful are your company. And it will also bring anything that will destroy you in the dunya and the akhirah closest to you. Right? And then he said, again, he talked about the seal. He talked about how the heart will sink to the lowest of the low. So instead of being close to Allah Azza wa Jal, thinking about the words of Allah and what He wants from Him, meaning being elevated, it sinks to the lowest of the low, so it becomes lower than an animal. Right? So transformed into worse than an animal. And that Allah Azza wa Jal will plot against you, not for you, will work against you, not for you. And again, you will see the truth as falsehood and falsehood as truth, and you'll be concealed from Allah Azza wa Jal. You'll have difficult living, he said. وَمِنْهَا الْمَعِيشَةُ الضَّنْكُ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْبَرْزَخُ وَالْعَذَابُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. Tight, difficult living in the dunya and in the grave, and punishment in the hereafter. So a lot of people care more about the here and now than when talking to them about the grave or the next life. He says you'll have difficult living here. Even if you are rich, you'll never be able to be happy. And the reason is you sin. And sin, as we said, is like poison. Right? Now, then he talked about al-qalbu salim. He says opposite of all of this are the pious who have this sound heart. And as we said, he says you must be safe from shirk and bid'ah and shahwa and ghafla and hawa. Now, then dividing the sins into major and minor and shirk. Do we need to go through the shirk, or we don't? You're okay with that? No, I mean to explain the categories of shirk. I already did. Do you want us to go through it? Is it hard, or are you okay? So for instance, when he talks about shirk and ibadah, he says, riya, all of it is shirk. All of riya is shirk, right? And it will invalidate an action. And he says also there is shirk in actions and in sayings and intentions, like sujood, prostrating to other than Allah Azza wa Jal, right? Or in terms of words, one who swears by other than Allah, that is also shirk. And he says, Na'am shirk, he says, as far as shirk in intentions, this is the limitless sea. And the sincere will be saved from it. And the sincerity is to be sincere to Allah Azza wa Jal in what you say and what you do and what you intend. And this is the religion of Ibrahim. Na'am. Then he talked about shirk, su'ul dhanni billah, thinking the worst about Allah. Speaking about Allah without knowledge, right? Meaning you say this is halal and this is haram and you have no clue about what you're talking about. Or you invent something religiously, and he specifically here talks about bid'ah. Anyone who innovates in Islam and he says this is something new that Allah Azza wa Jal does not like, but he thinks or claims that Allah Azza wa Jal likes it, is saying about Allah Azza wa Jal what he does not know, and this is he's saying that is a great sin, and it is connected to shirk, because shirk only happens when you speak about Allah Azza wa Jal without knowledge, right? Then he talked about zina and the harm of zina, the doors of sin that we talked about, which is the eyesight and the thoughts and the tongue and the feet, the movement of the feet or the movement of the body. The punishment of zina. And then he talked here also briefly about the bad end, su'ul khatima, and that sin could lead to that. If a person sins and continues to sin and upset Allah Azza wa Jal, especially those big sins, if he killed someone, if he commits zina, if he commits sodomy, and does not repent from it, he says, you cannot feel safe that when it's time for you to die, that you could lose faith. Or you could die upon that sin and be resurrected with that sin and you be deprived of repentance. So he says one of the reasons for su'ul khatima, for having a bad end, is insistence upon sin and not repenting. Right. Now, then he talked about sodomy, and then he talked about the how you treat those desires, and specifically those intense sexual desires. How do you treat it? And we said, as I mentioned in the summary I gave, he says you prevent it from happening before it happens, or you uproot it once it happens. And he talked about lowering your gaze and averting it from sin. And he says, why do you do this? You do it because Allah Azza wa Jal wants from you. Meaning you don't look at the haram. Why? Because Allah Azza wa Jal wants that from you. It protects you from all the sinful, poisonous arrows that could penetrate and enter your heart. And it will give you comfort. When you stay away from looking at the haram, it will give you joy of being near Allah Azza wa Jal that you cannot get unless you protect your eyes. And will also give you happiness in your heart. And will also give you light inside your heart. Give you also a distinguishing ability to tell between right and wrong, good and evil. It will also give you courage in your heart, protect you from the shaitan, enable you, free you, so that you can think about Allah and think about what benefits you. And the eye has direct link to the heart. You cannot have a sound heart or a good heart if the eye is corrupt, right? And then the other thing that he talked about is that you should keep your heart occupied with what is going to protect you from sin, and that is the love of Allah Azza wa Jal, and the fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. Then he talked about the basis of shirk is that shirk in mahabba, in loving other than Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, the kinds of love, we talked about him, and the types of things that are beloved, we talked about that. Now, and then he talked about ishq here. And if you remember when he talked about the harms of ishq, and he said we cannot even enumerate all the harms of ishq. Then he talked about the story of Yusuf, remember, alayhi salam, what he went through and how he resisted it, and why she was vulnerable, and why Yusuf alayhi salam was protected from the harms of ishq. That is all there in the book, and there's benefit in it, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. He tells you, for instance, that there's no benefit in ishq, and that obsessive love, either in the dunya or in the akhirah, and it will take you away from Allah Azza wa Jal, and it's tormenting and it's humiliating, etc., etc. And it will corrupt your senses and will corrupt the heart itself, right? Because it will corrupt tawheed itself. And he says ishq has a beginning and a middle and an end. He says if it's at the beginning phase, he says you stop it. It's much easier to stop it then, and it will go away. Don't let it progress into the middle and the end. If it goes to the middle or in the end, then it is there. It's really hard to take it and uproot it. But it's not impossible. But until that happens, you have to be chaste, right? Iffa, stay away from the haram. You don't look, you don't touch, you don't get close to that person. And at the same time also, you continue to be patient and you conceal that you're in love with so-and-so because you're not allowed to disgrace so-and-so just because you've experienced those strong emotions. So you don't disobey Allah Azza wa Jal because of those feelings that you have. No. And then he said, I think this is close to the end. No. And he says that the thing is that Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who deserves to be loved the most because of how perfect He is in Himself and how great He was to all of us. And once you actually give all this love to Allah Azza wa Jal, you will find the greatest joy in this life. You will find the greatest joy in this life. Allah Azza wa Jal created you to experience that joy in this life and experience it in the hereafter. So don't be distracted by other loves. You are allowed to love, but that love is not supposed to dominate your heart, nor is it supposed to divert you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? No. And then he said, and this is the last inshallah, he said that the greatest of the joys of dunya is a thing that will assist you to reach Allah Azza wa Jal. The best of the joys of dunya is the joy that will take you to away Allah Azza wa Jal. And the joys of dunya and the pleasures of this dunya are of three types. The best and the most complete is what takes you to the hereafter. That's the first. The second kind is the one that deprives you from the pleasure of the hereafter. So the joy of fornication, zina, the joy of sodomy, the joy of anything that is haram will bring you some joy. It doesn't last, but it deprives you of the greatest joy in this world and when you meet Allah Azza wa Jal. Ladha aqabat alama. You're going to feel some joy, but it will produce immense pain later. It has to. This is how Allah Azza wa Jal made it. And He says the third type of ladha, the third type of joy and pleasure is one that is not going to deprive you of the greatest pleasure in the hereafter, but it will not undercut your potential. It will waste your time, right? So that instead of using this joy to assist you in reaching Allah Azza wa Jal, it became a distraction. So he says it's called vain or in vain, useless, right? It does not bring anything useful, but it's not haram. And that is it. And then he talked about loving a wife and that how loving a wife, and he brought the example of the Prophet ﷺ. It does not contradict loving Allah Azza wa Jal, of course, and how in fact could assist the love of Allah Azza wa Jal because it could free you from pursuing the haram, free you from being preoccupied, thinking about women and this and that. You could fulfill your desire, and the rest you could give that to Allah Azza wa Jal. And while you are actually fulfilling your desire, if you think about it, if you manage to do it, that itself could be an act of worship that He could steer you towards Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So this is it, inshallah. Kind of, again, a quick summary with a little bit of explanation of the main points that we've mentioned. But this is what ibnalqayyim, rahimahullah, talked about. And you're going to discover, and I'll leave, inshallah, some space for you to ask questions. You're going to discover that when you're going to go through the book again, or if you read the book again, you'll discover that you've actually have missed some things. And you forgot about some things. Even if you've read it, even if you've listened to the lecture, you go back to it, you say, I forgot about this. And I forgot about that. And that's the nature of reading, by the way, or listening to anything. The first time that you read it, what's the percentage of what you're going to capture? It depends on you, but it could be a 30%, a 40%. I imagine that it's not going to exceed 50%, especially the first time that you're reading, and it's a new topic. It's not going to exceed 50% by any means. So the first time you're going to read that book, you're going to get some stuff, and that is great. Don't expect to get everything. You're not supposed to get everything, but get the main points. But then, especially for a book like Ad-Da' wa Dawa, the disease and the cure, it deserves multiple readings. Because you don't have a lot of books written like that deal with treatment of the shahwa and treatment of the heart and being close to Allah Azza wa Jalla. You don't have a lot, especially as easy, as concise as this one. You could read other books by ibnalqayyim, but it's going to take you a while. But this one is easiest to read. So that means that if you read it once, fine, put it aside. But then plan again to reread it a year from now, let's say. Put it on a schedule. I'll reread it a year from now. And you'll discover how much you will gain from that the second time you read it, and then the third time that you read it. And document those benefits, because you're going to make the second and the third reading easier, inshallah. Now, there are two new additions to The Disease and the Cure in English that I just found out about. One is by Darus Salam and the other is by IIPH. You can go online, you could order those, order each. I don't know which one is better, order both. But have that book in your library, home library. You should have something that you could call library at home. Even if it's just one shelf, but something, right? And put it there and plan, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal, to read it once more if you have not read it, or to start reading it so that you could extract those benefits. And then plan a second, as I said, a second and a third reading, and document these things. And then you could use the book in multiple ways. One of them is just to start sharing these benefits with others around you. You can go to social media. If you have social media, just publish something. This is what ibnalqayyim said. You'll remember it better, but a lot of people will know about it just because you shared it. This is the benefit from his book here. This is a benefit from his book there. This is a summary of what he has said. This is how you can, just we talked about, this is how you could treat a disease. This is how you could treat temptation. Send it and share it, because a lot of people don't know about it. And if someone learns it because of you, you're rewarded. If someone reads the book because of you, you are rewarded. Right? So I want you, inshallah, to kind of take this as an opportunity. You just didn't just finish the book and then done with it. No. It means that this is yours now, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. Read it more than once, inshallah. So before I take your questions, so I don't forget about it, inshallah. So next week, we're just going to take a break. So we're not going to be meeting next week, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. The week after, we're going to start a new book, a shorter book, by Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi. It's called Dhammu al-Waswasi wa Ahlih. So it's critiquing obsessive whispers and its people. Okay? And the topic of the book is what evidently is about what? The whispers of shaitan. But specifically those obsessive whispers that don't go away. When it comes to purification, when it comes to any act, a whisper that keeps coming back and back and back. So you want to know what Ibn Qudama says about that and how to treat it bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. And you know, however we can enrich whatever he had written, and you are invited also to participate and to add to it bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. That would be much appreciated. So not next week, the week after bi'idhnillah azza wa jal, and we'll start with an introduction of the book, of the author, and of the topic itself. And then bi'idhnillah, the week after, we'll start with the book itself, bi'idhnillah. No. So you could check with Habib bookstore if they have it, bi'idhnillah. Otherwise, your best bet is online, bi'idhnillah. No, it's not here. The Disease and the Cure. The Disease and the Cure, inshallah. Okay. So this is now your chance, bi'idhnillah, to ask questions about the book or about anything that I've said. If it was confusing, mysterious, tamam. Tfaddal, yeah. No. In the book? Okay. So kind of a clear path in the book into how to deal with these modern ailments like depression and anxiety and what have you? No, there's nothing that as clear as the step is 1, 2, 3, 4. And he's not going to mention depression by name, nor anxiety by name. But if you could read it into what he's saying. So he's talking about the tightness of the heart, the darkness of the heart, the discomfort, So all these things, right, if you just translate them into modern lingo, that becomes what we're talking about today. So if you look at the totality of the book, yeah, it does give you a way out of it, right? It's not in the modern way of, well, this is the illness and this is what you're feeling and this is what you go through it, but in the more classical way of, this is the whole picture. Not just what you're going through here. No, this is the whole picture. And the whole picture will pull you back all the way to, why did Allah create you? Right? Because it's important to have that foundation for a person to say, oh, okay, this is what I'm basing this on. This is what that medicine is based on. Why did Allah create you? What is shirk? And a person could be suffering from, let's say, whatever. And he says, what do I need to know about shirk? No, you need to know about shirk, because in case it's contributing to your condition, it could save you. And in case it could later on, right, develop into a type of shirk, it could save you. So if a person today, for instance, if they want to kind of help, they could take all those elements and they could structure it in a way where a person who today suffers from all of these things could pass and read them in a way that is comprehensible to them, relatable, and understand the totality of what he's talking about. But it's going to require a little bit of effort. So if somebody has anxiety or this or that, a little bit of effort when they're reading the book, but it is there. But he just has to dig, right? Yeah. Second one. No. So you could translate it as OCD. So the new book, right, you could translate it as talking about OCD and instances of OCD. Yes. It's talking about whispers from shaitan that leads somebody to be excessive in their worship, in their tahara, in their performance of the salah, to the extent where it could break them, right? That's what it's talking. No, but that's the hope, right? At least whether you are a person who has OCD or OCD tendencies, or you know somebody, you don't have to be someone who has it, but you know someone, or you want to be able to treat someone like this, or you are a psychologist, therapist, counselor, and you want to understand what Islam could help you with to be able to treat it. Yeah, it's worth your time to listen to it, inshallah. Yeah. How can someone develop a habit of reading? This is a really good question. First of all, if following really what the pattern that ibnalqayyim rahimahullah lays out, to understand its importance, like it's really important. You cannot be a Muslim. I don't think you can be a Muslim today, especially someone who wants to be a strong Muslim, without reading. Like, where are you getting your stuff from, your information? What is developing your iman? So how many lectures are you attending per week? So most of the people attend what? Khutbah al-Jum'ah, and this is it, right? Okay, maybe you're attending also a halaqah, but the halaqah is just an hour or so. Is this enough for the entire week for you to be able to resist all the temptations of the dunya, all the temptation of this world, or the confusion, religious confusion, spiritual confusion that is going to come your way, and then and then also, deal with your problems and grow as a person? Is that enough? He says it cannot be enough. You need to really start reading. So the best thing is, first, understand its importance. Second, ask Allah Azza wa Jal for it, because it's a gift after all. So you want to ask Allah for that gift. Third, choose a book, right? Choose a book. Choose a book that is interesting, especially in the beginning, right? Because you may not have the discipline yet. Let me talk about myself. I may not have the discipline yet. Or maybe I'm a phase in my life at this moment where it's just hard for me to read. This is difficult, that is too long. But I'm interested in this topic. I'll sit and read this, okay? Islamic topic I'm going to focus on. Pick this book, right? And then pick an easy one, not very difficult. You don't want something to frustrate you. things that you read that you cannot understand, very difficult for you to comprehend because you're going to give up. Read something that is interesting and that's also easy to read. And then say to yourself, I'll read 5 pages a day. That's it, right? 5 pages a day. And pick a time. Pick the place and pick the time. So it could be, for instance, in my room, on my desk after Isha, after Fajr, after this. And you know that when that time comes, is you're going to sit and you're going to read, and it's only 5 pages. It will take you maybe 10 minutes. Close the book and leave. But develop a habit. And once you have a habit, you will find yourself, especially if you like the book, that you start to read 10 and 15 and 20 pages. Right? And add to it, inshallah, if you are dedicated, if you want, extra benefit, have also a notebook right next to you. It doesn't have to be something that you do in the beginning. I don't want to complicate it. But ultimately, maybe a notebook right next to you. You read something interesting, write it down. Because you're going to forget it later. You read a good point, write it down. Meaning, write it down, name of the book, page. Write it down, name of the book, page, and leave it. Later on, when you're going to come a year from now, 2 years from now, and read it, you'll be surprised. You say, I read this, I read this, I read this. But because it's an important point written with your own words, summarized, hopefully, it's going to teach you a lot. Again, you wrote it, but it will reteach you something. This is the way, inshallah, to kind of develop that habit. And once you start, hopefully you don't stop. So what's the next book? And what's the next book? And what's the next book? And you can also read it, in a group. It could be a book club. One of the tricks that are helpful is to have a book club. It could be just me and you, rereading the book together. Then we meet when we talk about it. Or you could start it and see how many people are interested. Who knows, right? But that's kind of what he talks about. When you do something good, it could lead to so many other good things. When you do something bad, it could lead to so many bad things. So hopefully, once you start, Allah Azza wa Jal will give you the insight and the energy bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jal to read. And it's always, always, always a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. You don't really read because of you. You read because Allah allowed you. So keep asking Allah Azza wa Jal for it. Yeah.
You mentioned that there's some actions that we love which lead us to doing what we love.
Yes.
So is the purification of the heart, that working on purifying your heart by doing more good things and abstaining from bad things, is that sufficient to make someone love the actions which please Allah?
Okay, so just doing what Allah loves and staying away from what Allah hates, is that sufficient to make you love what Allah loves? Is that what you...
For example, in the purification of the heart, would it make it so that the heart is in a better state? It's easier to perform the ibadat, like
Yes. I understand your question. So is purification of the heart something that will make the performance of ibadah, especially one that is kind of you may be resistant to, will it make it easier? Yes, ultimately it will. Because what is the resistance that you have towards the ibadah? One of the resistance is the distance of sin. Right? So sin kind of had destroyed the bridge between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. So when you start worshipping Allah and purifying your heart, you're rebuilding that bridge. So it's easier then to perform that ibadah. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or easy all of a sudden or easy very quickly, but ultimately it becomes easier, right? The other thing that that is stopping you from it, or that puts that difficulty in the ibadah, sometimes it's the nature of the ibadah itself and the nature of humanity itself. We love money and we're asked to donate. So there's that nature. But the greater the purification of the heart, you could change that nature. Or jihad. Everybody wants to stay alive, but if purification of the heart can change that nature. So that could take a while for it to happen. It could take years, it could take decades for it to happen. But ultimately, at least it makes it easier, and maybe eventually it can even be joyful. So you give sadaqah with joy, right? You pray with joy. You go to jihad with joy. Yeah. Possible. Alaikum salam. Some Muslims, you're right. Some Muslims in the world, they cannot read. Yeah. Who am I talking to when I said this? Talking to us. No, I'm not talking to someone in a village, in a Muslim country, who will not hear me and does not read. No, of course not. Because if you're in a village and you're isolated from the world, right, you're not being bombarded. I mean, if a person cannot read and cannot understand, you have your excuse. Now, but we're talking about, especially you are living here and you're young and you are facing all of these temptations and you're being invited to sin continuously without stop. He said, how can you resist it without reading? That's what I mean. Jazakallah. Iyakum. Inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam. Tfaddal. Yeah, so then maybe in other manuscripts, so Dammul Waswasi wal Muwaswasin. See. Barakallah. Yeah.
You mentioned Quran and Dua as being a sort of ailment for a cure, for the ailments that occur. When reading the Quran as a cure, a lot of us don't really know the tafsir and the translation. So would it be sufficient for that person to just read it Arabic, even though they don't understand it, or is it better for them to read it with the translation and the tafsir? And if so, we were talking about reading as well, limiting it to a couple of pages or not. Doing it with the tafsir and the translation would also further make that short for you if you want to be more consistent. He's going to say what you're thinking on that.
Like if you add to it, reading the Quran is going to shrink kind of the portion that is available for other books.
A portion of the Quran itself, right? Like if you, for example.
I see. Yeah.
And I'm thinking that it's still beneficial. I just wanted to see it.
Jazakallah khair. So what you bring up is a very good point, which is that when we talked about the Quran being a cure, is it sufficient here you're asking for a person to read the Quran in Arabic even though you don't understand what you're reading? Or should a person read the tafsir as well, right? And if you're reading the tafsir with the Quran, that can shrink the time that you have for reading the Quran because you're reading the Quran, but also then you're moving on to the tafsir itself. No. And if you're reading the translation, does that decrease your reward, right? Because you're reading less of the letters of the Quran. This is a really good point. And it's a good point because I'm going to try to be emphatic, right? For effect. It says, no, you cannot just read the Quran without understanding it. No. Just like I said, you have to read. To tell me, the benefit of the Quran, what benefit will it bring you when you're reading things that you don't understand? I'm just trying to be emphatic, right? Of course it's going to bring you benefit. Of course. You are being rewarded for it. There is barakah when you read it, even if you understand nothing. But when you read the Quran like that and you finish after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, do you feel a lot of change in your heart? Not really. You've just read and you finished, read and finished. It doesn't affect you. And so it does not cure you. The Sahaba, when they were reading, they read something that they understood. And so it was talking to them. This is what he means by it being a cure for temptation. How? Because Allah is talking to you about it. A cure for confusion, religious confusion, spiritual confusion. Because Allah is talking to you about it. And because of that, that cures you. So then you must, there are a lot of brothers and a lot of sisters I hear on the other side, who they think, I just will read Quran, that is enough. No, it is not enough. I'll just memorize Quran. Memorize the entire Quran. It doesn't matter. If you don't understand what it's saying, it's not going to work for you. You really need to, and if you say, will I be rewarded less? No. Because this is, when you're reading the tafsir, this is talabul ilm. This is you're seeking knowledge. Then what you are reading of the Quran becomes more significant. And because of it, Allah Azza wa Jal rewards you more. Right? Allah rewards you more. So they were talking about, in Ramadan, when you're reading the Quran, kind of the scholars were just kind of discussing it. He says, if I read the Quran, should I just read a lot? Just read as many khatmas as possible, even though my mind is not present? So 3 times, 4 times finishing of the Quran, or do I read one with contemplation? So they said the one who reads a lot of the Quran without thinking is like someone who's giving, let's say, a lot of dollars, right? It's a lot. But the one who reads it with contemplation, he is like someone who is giving a diamond. It's one, but it's very precious. So it matters when you understand the Quran. So I think you must read the Quran with understanding, and that will mean tafsir, and that will read the translation. Only then you truly can you say, I've read the Quran. Otherwise, you're just reading words and you have no connection to them. Jazakallah khair for that. Both is great. You can do both, barakallahu fiqh. But at least like some contemplation is needed from us, inshallah. You had your hand, or?
So you mentioned that,
Can I
and I'm not sure, I think it was, I don't know if it was mentioned in the book, that it's sincerity, so basically it's going to be private and public. But there are some actions that maybe that can't be done. Like you mentioned, for example, sharing knowledge with someone.
No,
So you can do that, you can always share knowledge with someone in public, but you can't share knowledge with
it's true.
So how does one do that?
Naam, so the question is about, how to be sincere with public acts of worship. And when something is public and it has to be public, don't hide it. It's public. You struggle, you strive, and you ask yourself, why am I doing this? And you also, kind of to provide a balance, have in secret acts of worship that you do between you and Allah Azza wa Jal to develop that ikhlas. So when it comes to those public acts of worship, you already have trained yourself, and then you say, I'm not proceeding, I'm not doing for the sake of anybody else, I'll do it for the sake of Allah. I don't want their praise, I don't want their recognition, I don't want any fame, none of these things. I'll just do it for Allah's sake, and then don't wait for recognition and praise and fame. Kind of dismiss it. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't come, it doesn't really matter. Don't let that be the motivation. And keep doing it just simply for that Allah is seeing you, not because people are seeing you. And for that, you need to have to remind yourself. It's not the easiest thing. It's really difficult. You have to keep reminding yourself, and you have to keep asking Allah Azza wa Jal for it. It's a struggle, but everybody struggles with it, inshallah. Should we stop? Okay, inshallah, we'll stop bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jal. So next week we're off. The week after, inshallah, we'll start with a new book. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.